All right, well, we've got a COVID constrained convention for Joe Biden, and it looks like it's going to boost his chances. Peter and Thurgood, collectively we've been at 12 different conventions. Let's start with you, Peter. What's been your experience in terms of seeing intra-party strife at some of these?
Well, I was at the 1980 convention in New York City, which had featured, Senator Ted Kennedy challenging the incumbent Jimmy Carter, and I was the executive assistant to the governor of New Hampshire. I had taken a leave of absence for 4 months to work on the Carter campaign, and New Hampshire ended up being about the only state north of the Mason-Dixon line that Jimmy Carter won. And there was extraordinary bitterness in our state about that. The delegates were split, I think, 12-10 for the president. There were contentious battles leading up to the convention. We had 2 or 3 rules committee meeting, and the main focus was on, if you were a pledged delegate, did you have to vote for that candidate in the first ballot, and or could you change your mind? And of course, the Kennedy people had lost, but they thought that momentum, was building for them leading into the convention, and that they could do a spirited speech and pull the delegates away, something like, the Gene McCarthy nominating, Adlai Stevenson's speech. And we passed a rule that said you had to vote for who you were pledged to. And if the party chairman felt that you were unreliable, he could replace you. And boy, that was a very tough vote. There was a lot of bad feelings. I almost got into a fist fight with one of my United States senators on the floor, in which we had to be restrained. And then the night that the president accepted Edward Kennedy had to be pushed out onto the platform, never stood next to the president, and that led us to helped us go to a resounding defeat. So it was a miserable experience from start to end, and thank God we're going to avoid that.
And 2016 wasn't, of course, as bad as that, but clearly you had a Clinton-Sanders dynamic, similar, again, maybe not as bad, but similar to the Carter-Kennedy dynamic in 1980. And we're not going to have that this year because there isn't a convention. In Thurgood, how is this going to work? You've been on the platform committee. How are you going to do a platform when you can't get together? And will this mean we can paper over some differences?
I think you're on to exactly what we'll see happen, or if we actually see anything happening beyond what's intended for us to see according to the script and carefully planned events for the week. And I certainly hope, for the sake of the party, that that's the way it goes. But you're right. Now, I had, with my platform committee experience, I had sort of the opposite of Peter's situation, because it was a re-election situation. So the party was fairly unified, and it became what is one of the more valuable experiences that you get in a convention atmosphere when people are present. It became not so much a battle over the platform for that re-election campaign as it was people positioning for the next 2 cycles. So people trying to line up support and building coalitions. And those opportunities are something that a lot of people look forward to, and in fact they need to try to build support for their efforts as they rise within the party. And it's going to be much harder for them to do that this time. But the divisiveness that you sometimes see in platforms, which is the other part of your question, appears to have been well handled, not solely by the Biden campaign, but also by the representatives of the Sanders campaign in particular, who appear to have had a genuine opportunity to influence the platform. There have been a number of notables working on different issue topics, trying to find opportunities to build somewhat common ground. So hopefully what we'll see is the kind of unity that you see in the re-election campaigns, but this time we may see it even though there was a pretty divisive primary.
And Peter, somebody like AOC who would clearly get a lot of speaking time if this had been a regular convention. I think she's getting 1 minute. Is that going to help?
They weren't good. They were never going to give AOC prime time. I mean, she might have been given 15 minutes at 4:45, right after the opening Pledge of Allegiance, but she was never going to get prime time. I mean, what's extraordinary, of course, we're talking about a platform, is the Republican Party has no platform, right? I mean, and it's not because it's a divisive platform. It's just because you're too goddamn lazy. That's all.
Yeah.
The president is lazy, and his political guys are lazy, and they don't care. They don't care about the Republican Party. They don't care about what they stand for. I mean, isn't that extraordinary?
And speaking of the president, the president and the vice president and Pence are both going to be in Wisconsin, this week, which is something that you would have never seen in the past. I mean, you do try and counter program against the other party's convention, but to send the sitting president into the location of where the convention is of course unheard of. But everything Donald Trump does doesn't surprise you.
Oh, you mean
do you think this will work?
President Trump is not following the rules, and Democrats are surprised? Oh, wait a minute, Mr. President Trump, you can't have a press conference every day. Oh, I guess you can. There are no goddamn rules. He can do what he wants, and we better understand that.
Well, with Thurgood, with your postal background, I'll say what Trump is complaining about is that Pelosi has scheduled a hearing during the Republican convention with the Postmaster General to talk about all the turmoil happening in USPS. So do you think that's a little bit of good timing, Thurgood? A little intentional on the Democrats' part, maybe getting 50-50 now with the president?
One could make that argument, but he certainly brought this on, and he even brought on the timing of it.
And what do you expect to come out of this postal hearing?
Well, I think at this point, the real action is going to end up being in the courts, actually. I think he has proven, the Postmaster General has proven to be somebody who is pretty adept, as publicly clumsy as it is. He seems pretty adept at playing both sides at the moment, where he promises to act with caution. He promises to not interfere on the one hand, and on the other hand, he does not act with caution, and he continually interferes.
Well, do you think he'll really show up to the hearing?
Well, he has said he will. Now, I'm not sure what he gets from saying he will and then punting.
Well, I don't think he checked with the president, and the president indicated this evening that it was probably not his wish that a member of his team undercut the day's positive Republican message with a pummeling on Capitol Hill. So I would guess that it's at best 50-50 whether the general will show up.
Because Steve, it sounds like you're going to have to hold our wagers on this one.
I think I will. And speaking of wagers, Thurgood, we've got about 3 days until Trump replaces Pence with Haley under your timetable. Is that correct?
That's right. And that is on the list of ways that he can one-up things or try to change do the game change move. And the other that it struck me, we mentioned that both of the principals on the Republican side would be in Wisconsin this week. It just seemed to me, I know that he has demonstrated an ability to grab people's attention, but it seems to me with all of the tools at his disposal, there are so many other ways to try to make news, steal news in 49 other states. And for him to do this is just so brazenly schoolyardish that I'll be interested in seeing whether that really is the right move or whether maybe he should have gone and done any of a number of things to promote his policies and his platform, such as it is.
Well, he's gonna, I mean, isn't he just, he's overdue on his own promise to produce a really beautiful healthcare plan. It was due about 5 days ago. He said 2 weeks, and apparently he's been distracted. Maybe he could spend a little less time on the links and come up with a beautiful healthcare plan. But I'm not going to hold my breath.
Well, I've got my shirt from my DNC days in '96, and I think the last convention the three of us were at together was in 2000 in Los Angeles. Although I think Thurgood was busy with Vice President Gore, but if I recall, Peter and I were hanging out with the Goo Goo Dolls at the Mondrian Hotel in West Hollywood.
Our best. I mean, that's of course, it's one good party, starting the weekend before, and I mean, the whole hustle to get floor passes is always a treat. So it's kind of sad that this could be the death knell for these kinds of conventions. I doubt if there'll be another one the way we used to see them.
I know. I mean, I remember hanging out with Mickey Hart, the drummer for the Dead, in LA, just sitting next to him, and you had such a confluence of people, and everybody was kind of just happy to be there and be a part of Americana, and see the political process go in place. And and as Thurgood said, you set yourself up for 2 cycles down the road at these. And so I think it's good for Biden not to have it this year from a campaign perspective, but I think it does hurt the party in the long run.
Yeah. I always like the strategy. Go ahead.
Do you think that the Republicans who are participating would have felt a little more awkward if it had been all in person? Because I think this was a tremendous speaker lineup for a lot of reasons, but it's particularly and it's a particularly interesting contrast to see the Republicans on the Democratic speaking ledger and what I assume will be 0 Democrats next week on the Republican side.
Well, who was that bum from Georgia? Zell Miller, wasn't it? Who Trump dragged out. I mean, Thurgood had a good idea of going back and pulling up the speakers roster from 2016 at the Republican convention and see how many of them have been indicted, how many of them have been denounced by Trump, how many were fired. I mean, it really would be a hall of shame. I think would be spectacular.
Yeah, remember his closest friend Tom Barrack is no longer on speaking terms.
Tom Barrack,
the glowing nomination speech.
Right.
Well, that's our homework for next week when we preview the Republican convention.
Oh, we will present.
Well, thanks, guys. We'll talk to you next week.
See you then.